Ba 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 ba. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Editor's Notes with me, Cy Williams, Editor-in-Chief of the long-standing, long-running Canadian cannabis culture magazine, High Canada Magazine. This episode of Editor's Notes is fueled by Fumes, High Canada Magazine's official rolling paper and our choice for 2023 Rolling Paper of the Year. Trino Morton, Tyler Morton, and Josh Cretin are the owners of Fumes Rolling Papers and Accessories. And Fumes is working hard at reestablishing black ownership within the Canadian cannabis industry. And they are making some serious headway too with these quality products that they produce. These three Halifax brothers started the rolling paper company in 2020, combining their passion with the business. And it is now, these rolling papers are now available around Canada. So as you know, it's Black History Month, and it's a great time to recognize and celebrate the many contributions of black individuals to both Canadian history and to cannabis culture. You might be asking yourself why a Caucasian man would be making a video about Black History Month. And I say, why not? I want you to know that I'm doing this because this month in particular serves as an important time to reflect on the hardships, the triumphs and the ongoing struggles that have been faced by the black community, not only in Canada, but around the world. This is an important topic, and I feel it is important to speak up, not only in support, and regardless of my skin color. The intersection of black history and cannabis culture highlights the resilience and creativity that has persisted despite systemic challenges, including and not limited to the war on drugs. It's essential to acknowledge the impact of systemic racism on communities and individuals and the role it has played in shaping the cannabis landscape. Now, historically, over-policing of some racialized and Indigenous groups in Canada has resulted in unequal application of drug laws, contributing to disproportionate rates of charges and convictions in these populations. Criminal records can severely and negatively impact a person's life and can perpetrate cycles of poverty and socio-economic disadvantage. Now, as we know, in 2018, Canada legalized cannabis production, distribution, sale, and possession for non-medical purposes. Advocates of criminal justice reform, they have raised some concerns that Indigenous and racialized people may not equitably benefit from legalization due to unequal police surveillance and drug enforcement. These groups are among priority populations for research on both cannabis and mental health. But their views on cannabis regulation have been largely absent from research and policymaking. Historical analysis shows us that Canada's earliest drug laws, including cannabis laws, had racist origins. Did you know that the 1908 Canadian Opium Act was largely the product of anti-Asian sentiment and was disproportionately applied to Chinese Canadians? Now, this resulted in high rates of convictions and expulsion of many immigrants from Canada at that time. Now, since then, Canadian drug policy has continued to disproportionately impact some racialized and Indigenous communities. And while Canada's war on drugs was meant to target high-level drug networks, it has often mirrored the wide-reaching U.S. campaign in rhetoric, punitive policies, and profiling practices. Police drug surveillance training that specifically profiles racial groups have been used to advance this approach. Impacts are reflected in disproportionate rates of arrests for low-level cannabis offenses among black and Indigenous populations. Although Canadian police services have not routinely collected information on the race of those they interact with, that's like stops and searches, the tide is changing. In 2019, the Ontario government began mandating the internal collection of race information for use of force incidents. Now, until this collection becomes routine practice, Police statistics cannot be used to confirm the presence of racial profiling or deny the presence. However, a number of field studies and empirical research does support the realities of racial profiling in Canada. Indigenous people in Western Canada and Black people in cities like Toronto and Montreal have reported more unprovoked stops and searches by police than their white peers. And in studying this topic, we found that Black youth from Ontario also reported higher rates of police stops, questioning, and searches than youth from other racialized backgrounds. Even more reading began to indicate to us that both Indigenous and Black youth from Southern Ontario reported frequent negative experiences with police, and they believed that they were treated differently because of their race. Additional quantitative surveys of Toronto youth and adults between 1994 and 2007 found that Black respondents were more likely to report experiences with racial profiling and being stopped and searched by police than those from other racial backgrounds. Now, these are older reports, but they certainly are reflective of the over-policing that has contributed to the high rates of racialized incarceration in Canada. Despite representing 3.5% of the Canadian population, Black Canadians accounted for 7.2% of the federal prison population. And that was in 2018-2019. Indigenous people, who comprise 4.9% of the population in Canada, accounted for 25.2% of the federal prison population. And this is from Public Safety Canada 2020. There is evidence that Indigenous people are systematically disadvantaged by the courts, the police, and the prison systems. And indeed, inquiries and inquests into Indigenous deaths in custody signal a very tragic consequence of this ongoing systemic injustice that's going on in Canada today. Broadly, the social impacts of justice involvement are enormous. Criminal records can severely and negatively impact individuals' life trajectory by employment and financial perspectives. This can be a real obstacle in obtaining a license, as this is one of the final steps receiving a security clearance. This is also extremely difficult for racialized communities, which are disproportionately affected by the cannabis possession arrest charges. Now, in Toronto between 2003 and 2013, Black people without criminal records were 3 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than Caucasians with similar records. And that was the Toronto Star reporting that. In a 2020 study from the Centre on Drug Policy Evaluation and the University of Toronto, they based this on 700 responses from 700 executives at 222 cannabis companies and found that 73% were Caucasian men. 12% were Caucasian women, 14% were racialized men, and 2% were racialized women. The racialized slice of Canada's cannabis leadership was made up of 40% of people South Asian origin, 19% East Asian origin, 15% Indigenous, 12% Arab, and 7% identifying as either Black or Hispanic. So in a nutshell, it's easy to see that our industry does not reflect Canadian society as a whole by any measure. And this continues to be there continues to be a lack of diversity among Canada's cannabis workforce and within their license holders. Before legalization in October 2018, nearly all of the 45 federally licensed cannabis producers were run by Caucasian men, some of whom had no prior experience in Canada's cannabis gray market at all. And the situation hasn't changed much since legalization. A 2020 study found that racialized men and women were significantly underrepresented among cannabis company executives and directors. 72%, if you remember, of whom were Caucasian men. This lack of representation in the industry is historically rooted in society. Racialized communities in Canada have been disproportionately impacted by arrests for cannabis possession, despite, and I mean this, despite similar or lower rates of consumption compared to non-racialized communities. This disparity, together with the security clearance process and a lack of access to capital, has made it extremely challenging for racialized communities to take part in the growth and success of the legalized recreational cannabis industry in Canada. Now, while progress is being made to prevent targeted discrimination for post-legalization possession, producers and retailers, together with federal and provincial licensing bodies and other industry players, must, and I mean must, collaborate to ensure that we create a more diverse, a more equitable, and more inclusive industry overall. In terms of representation, there is still more work to do. Federal and provincial governments, licensing agencies, and cannabis companies should all be taking the first steps to address the cannabis industry's historical shortcomings on these issues. But here we are, 5 years deep into legalization, and we still have so much to do. And if you and your company are not taking these steps, you got to ask yourself and ask your company, why not? For instance, many provincial retail licensing bodies and retailers have begun efforts to increase the diversity of cannabis retail ownership. Some major industry players in Canada have also taken initial steps to begin improvement on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One vertically integrated cannabis company announced a while ago the creation of a new vice president position meant to enhance awareness and develop programs around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Another Canadian cannabis producer was named in Bloomberg's 2020 Gender Equity Index, which is a big deal. This tracks the performance of companies committed to achieving gender equity gender equality within their organizations. The Canadian federal government has also enacted legislation to address prior cannabis convictions. Bill C-93, introduced in August 2019, waives record suspension, wait periods, and fees for those only convicted of simple possession of cannabis. The government estimates that there are probably 10,000 Canadians who would be eligible for this type of record suspension, with legislation expected to largely benefit racialized communities. Now, there's a caveat, big however. Few people have pursued the long and complex application procedure, and that was further delayed by all the COVID-19 pandemonium. And as of October 1st, 2021, the Parole Board of Canada has only received 780 applications, and 484 record suspensions have been approved. I would like to be able to take a few minutes to gratefully acknowledge a few of the amazing Black-owned cannabis-based businesses that I know and we support as High Canada Magazine. One in particular is owned by a brother and sister team, and people have been taking note across the country. Harvester is a Black family-owned and operated craft cannabis cultivation and processing facility. Ashley and Michael Athill have reached an absolutely astounding accomplishment of being able to fully self-fund Harvester, a goal that all entrepreneurs strive for. And our longtime contributor I'd like to shout out, and now the Ontario editor of High Canada Magazine, Sabrina Mohammed, also known as the Trim Queen, has taken the Canadian and international accessory world by storm the last few years. And she is truly one of the greatest plant champions and advocates I've ever met. And then I want to shout out Edmonton entrepreneur Keenan Pascal, who came to the conclusion one day that people from every walk of life were entering the Canadian cannabis industry. And he is now the chief executive of the successful cannabis manufacturing business Token Naturals. I would also be terribly remiss to not shout out my fellow media makers, O'Neill Crawford, host of the sensational cannabis-related podcast, which has had some of the most interesting and most intelligent content being put out in 2023. I can't wait to see what 2024 has in store for both his guests and his topics. O'Neill is a gem of a host. Another media maker I'd like to shout out is by far my favorite content creator in 2023, and that's Amelia, aka Mellow Media, host of the Mellow Lounge and constant content creator. Check her out on all platforms, but especially at Mellow Media on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube. And trust me when I say this, you won't regret it. This woman has like a direct line to my funny bone. I'd also like to shout out Haiku Co-Productions, founded by the awesome Anisha Reindolf. And we have some of the hottest cannabis events in the country being produced by this amazing company. They are a vegan, gluten-free, natural cannabis lifestyle brand, and they are striving to break the stigma behind cannabis. Haiku.co creates a holistic lifestyle for everyone to enjoy across Canada and beyond, for cannabis and non-cannabis users alike. Check out their website at www.haikuco.com for all the amazing events that they have planned in February and beyond. Okay, I just want to say, by us honoring the legacy of Black cannabis and cannabis-related business owners, artists, creators, innovators, and advocates, we recognize their significant contribution to both the cannabis and broader cultural movements. This month and beyond, fostering an inclusive and equitable environment that ensures that diverse voices continue to be heard and celebrated is so important. As we reflect on the past and the present, it's crucial to remain committed to the fight for freedom, change, and equality. By acknowledging the intertwined histories of Black individuals in cannabis culture, we contribute to a more comprehensive and accurate understanding of our shared history, and we can all work towards a more just and inclusive future. Okay, that's it for me today. Thank you for joining me in order to take this time to acknowledge and appreciate Black History Month and how it relates to the cannabis sector in this amazing country of ours. We have to do better. Let's do better, Canada. Make sure you hit like if you enjoyed this video and smash that subscribe button to stay informed about all things high in Canada. This is Cy Williams, Editor-in-Chief of High Canada Magazine. Peace. This has been